$13.5 million. It sounds crazy from where we are today, but when you think about it, it's all bullish right now. It's all green lights. I mean, there's literally 8 or 9 bullish things going for Bitcoin.
You think price, I mean, it's weird saying it above 100,000, like price is suppressed, but do you think there's anything at play there?
The tinfoil hat theory. Once we get a little bit further out into Bitcoin, once we go into a $10 trillion asset class, a $20 trillion asset class, we're not going from 1 million to 200,000, because 0.1 Bitcoin will get you to retirement. Here's the caveat.
Mr. Dante Cook, thank you for joining me here today and being a playable character again in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
No problem, bro. Got you.
You're one of the smartest people I know in the Bitcoin space. So I would love to start talking about how much you put into studying Bitcoin and just money in general. And I would love to know what's on your mind just in general. Like what's really eating it? You see so much stuff. You see so many things. What's really kind of not grinding your gears, but like what are you really kind of focused on?
There's so much that you could talk about in the world of Bitcoin right now. The craziest part about Bitcoin is that we're back over 100K. We're less than 5% from an all-time high, and people are just like yawning. What's next? And I love that sense of anticipation that the community has. There's always the next thing. There's always something bigger. I think the hope and the optimism of looking forward to the next thing is contagious. But honestly, it's all bullish right now. It's all green lights. And, Lynn Alden had a great presentation not too long ago. I mean, there's literally, 8 or 9 bullish things going for Bitcoin. You've got institutional adoption that's coming in record waves, right? These are pension funds that are buying MicroStrategy. I think we just saw the state of Florida bought $86 million worth of MicroStrategy in their last filing. It's just a different world that we live in. And I think everybody's recognizing that the Titanic is starting to crash. And the only life raft that there is available, it's not bonds, right? Scott Bessent, one of the best manipulators, traders, arbitragers in the world, can't even get the bond market to cooperate with his plan. That is probably the only black swan that people just aren't looking at right now. Is the $9.2 trillion in debt that the United States has to refinance. But, when you look at a guy like, if Scott Bessent can't manipulate the bond market, then who can? Mm-hmm. When you look at stocks, right, what are the real growth drivers? Like the AI story is kind of already baked into earnings. It's already baked into valuations. It's already baked into companies. When you look at private equity, well, private equity is not as good as it seems. One, the cost of capital is super high right now. You've got debt, at 7, 8, 9, 10%, even if you're borrowing at private equity levels. And so the rates of return and the leverage they're able to put on these businesses isn't as high. You've got search funds and independent searchers leaving Harvard that want to go buy a $2 million HVAC company that are competing with private equity folks now. And so private equity is not as good as returns as you thought before. Venture capital doesn't have the return profile. There's not as many things that are out there on the asymmetric bet and risk that don't require a ridiculous amount of capital in order for them to make the returns necessary to return a fund, right? $1 billion exit is chump change now. And so when you look at all of these different markets and these asset classes, if you're a large person trying to allocate $100 billion, well, what's more attractive than Bitcoin? What is the next asset class? And so that's the question that I put back on other people. If you're going to put $1 into gold or into another thing, here's the most interesting thing about gold, right? You look at Italy. Italy has, I think, the 3rd largest gold reserves in the world. And gold going to 4,000 does not do a damn thing for Italy on the sovereign, nation state level in terms of their balance sheet, because the world is not on a gold standard anymore. That amount of gold or gold getting to that level doesn't move the needle. And so when you think about Bitcoin going from a $2 trillion asset class to $20 trillion, it's literally, where's the rest of this capital going to flow right now? Where are you going to put that next $1 billion or $1 trillion? I think it's Bitcoin. I think it's all bullish. So
You hit so many things right there. It's true. It's unbelievable. But expected from you. You do a ton of content over the years. You've talked to a ton of people, employers, businesses you run, stuff like that. You're always, talking to people. And what's the common thread you see between the people who understand Bitcoin and those who don't?
One of the most hopeful things that I see between people that are into Bitcoin and people who aren't into Bitcoin, and this would probably be related to people who are in, our stage of life or our age range, is the sense of like hope in like family and in kids. Like Bitcoiners on average, people who get Bitcoin, they have bigger families. Like we are single-handedly holding this, 1 point whatever burst per person in America above water. Because I can tell you, my friends and people that are my age that have just prioritized the career ladder, prioritized the success ladder, prioritized the party and have fun life, ladder, are all pretty hopeless, right? The places that they want to buy, they thought they could buy, they can't afford. The lifestyle that they thought that they wanted to have, like, well, they're there and they're having it, but they're realizing it's more expensive than they thought. And Bitcoiners are just humble people. I think one of the most beautiful things about people that get Bitcoin and people that don't is you start to get into this humility that there's a lot less in the world that I know and understand that I thought I knew and understood before. Bitcoin has been this opening into finance, into politics, into economics, into religion, into a lot of areas of my life where I've had to repattern and reorient what I think the good life is. And it's this orientation around a good life. It's an orientation around a hopefulness. People say, I used to be this person that wanted to do things, what they say, large, fast, and famous for God. And now I'm just sort of understanding that Eden, right, like, is a place to be, a thing to do, and a people to love. And once I'm fulfilling that, and I have some Bitcoin that gives me some peace of mind around some of that to help me, like, fit within that triangle, a thing to do, a place to be, and people to love, everything else is just gravy on top. And I think that's my kind of personal view and perspective, but it's honestly very common within people that are in Bitcoin that I don't believe that the rest of the world knows or understands. And I can see people just on a rat race. They're on the hamster wheel. When I show up to events or soccer games or business meetings or whatever, there's this restlessness and this hopelessness that what I'm doing today isn't enough. What I'm doing today doesn't matter or won't matter. And so, I hope other people get into Bitcoin so that they can understand those qualities, man. That's the good stuff. That's what we're after. It's not just number go up. It's the freedom go up that comes along with it that I really hope people get.
So true. So beautifully said. And it's, people don't want money. They want what money can get them, and that's exactly what you just outlined. They want the freedom. They want to find their calling, their passion, whatever it is, spend time with family, with loved ones. And you and I have talked about that ad nauseum for the last, 3 years, together, but on our content as well. What do you think the world looks like at even $1 million of Bitcoin, like on the way towards there? At what point do you think the dollar goes no bid? Like when people are like, I'm not accepting or your dollars for Bitcoin. Like, where do you think that? Because at some point, like if we're at $13 million or $45 million per Bitcoin, there's a chance that the dollar just, I don't know if it ceases to exist, but it's just kind of like, it's just worthless. And like no one's, or only certain pockets of society using it, the government's using it. Maybe it's CBDC, UBI or something like that. But what does life look like? And is the dollar, at what point are people just kind of like rejecting it in that sense? And people are just flooding to Bitcoin. Is it like at $1 million? Is it 5 million? Or is it maybe more 20, 50, 100 million?
Well, I'll tell you what it looks like for me. It's going to look like some property in Michigan somewhere, off the grid, where, me and my kids will be out there. We'll have a couple of other friends and people will be out on the lake. I'll finally be able to afford a place in Petoskey
Yeah.
Because the thing about someone who owns a house in
Oh.
Petoskey, Michigan, is you'll never sell your house in Petoskey, Michigan, unless Bitcoin goes to 1 million. But what do I think about the dollar at that point? Honestly, it is so hard to know. What I do understand, I think Britain's a great example. So I don't think people realize or recognize that like Britain for like 300 years was like the global power, like in the world. And nobody other than like people that enjoy like Premier League football believe that they are the leader in any capacity, at any sport, at any level, at any place. Financially, New York is the district of the world. People, it used to be London, right? From a naval and sea capacity, right? It used to be the UK and the British. Even from a spy perspective, James Bond is no longer the top spy. Like I would go Jack Reacher, I would go my guy from Terminal List, and I might pick Jason Bourne before I pick James Bond anymore. That's going to get a lot of hate comments. So when you think about a nation in decline, it's not that they go to nothing, is that they cease to have an identity. They cease to be the superpower that they once were. And the decline doesn't happen all at once, but it happens slowly, gradually. And then you're in a place where you're no longer dictating the rules. You're caving in on trade agreements. You're caving in on different things that other people say because you don't have the power and the force anymore. Fortunately for the United States, I feel like God has just blessed the United States with so many advantages from a geographical perspective, from being surrounded by multiple oceans, from being connected to not only Canada, maybe not all of Canada, maybe just Alberta. We'll see if they're going to cede or not. But to Mexico and Central America and South America, from temperance to geography to how the wind blows, there's just like so many advantages that America has that other geographies don't. But if you do combine Chinese technology, capability, resourcefulness with the natural resources of Russia and the population and capability and talent in India, I feel like the world could shift over the next 20 to 30 years because they don't need us. They have all the energy they need. They have all the technical capability that they need. They have all the ability to manufacture and create and build and do things that we can't anymore. So I really see this whole Peter Zeihan disunited nations thing really playing out. The guy's an idiot when it comes to Bitcoin. You know, what is it at? 16,999. Well, it's got 17,000 more to go. Dude's an idiot in terms of Bitcoin. But in terms of his geopolitics and disunited nations, that's what I really see happening. It's going to be the East versus the West, and Africa and UK are going to be the two continents, countries that there's going to be a war over who buys them out or who's able to defend them or protect them or acquire them. They're the two in the middle, but it's going to be Russia, India, China, Australia is just along for the ride versus Central America, South America, Mexico, Alberta, and the rest of Canada, maybe in North America, United States. That's what the world is going to look like. And I don't want to be in that world. I think it's going to be, a pretty sad place. But if the Bible has taught me anything, people have a lot of thoughts about the Bible, like God condones this stuff. No, God doesn't condone wars. God does not condone, what happens when there's bad leadership and bad character. But we see it over and over again. That's what happens. It's a recounting and retelling of what always happens when we humans get in positions of power. We crave it, we create destruction, and that ends in war. I don't think that we're going to get out of that cycle. I don't think that Bitcoin is going to save us from ourselves.
Do you think that it's just a quick thought on, do you think it's a function going forward though, that Bitcoin, the incentives will shape the world in that there will be less violence? Like, it might be this period we go through, but does it start changing people where it incentivizes less war in your mind?
It incentivizes it for sure, but only if the system fully adopts it. Only if the system fully adopts it and fully embraces it. We have to get to some sort of ceasefire. There have to just be more than one country to say we're going on to a Bitcoin standard. And it's not going to be through coercion. It's not going to be through force. But over time, it's going to allow the settlement system, the payment system, the system of global trade to resettle. Right now, it is built on SWIFT and the dollar and, this euro dollar network and all of these sort of back deal agreements and trades and military and war and oil. Trump's in Saudi Arabia playing golf. No, he's not. Like, he's sending a message to like Israel and Iran. And, anyways, all of this sort of stuff is like, it'll have to be a coordinated collective effort in order for the incentives to truly play out. I believe that Bitcoin is the only thing that can remove us from us, because it's rules without rulers. It's code, it's character. And, as we're seeing in this whole op return war going on right now that I won't speak on. I don't have a strong formulated opinion on that. I heard a wise man always say, two people looking at someone looking at two people arguing in the distance don't know who's the fool and who's right. And so they're both idiots. And so there's an element of me just like staying out of it because I don't know if I'm going to be the fool or the wise person. And so, but even within ourselves and in the Bitcoin network, you can see how pretentious and how visceral we can become and how quickly we can be divided on insignificant or significant topics.
Well said. Very well said. Do you think that, like, we saw FTX blow themselves up, we saw Terra Luna, we saw all these other entities over the years, many over the years, to blow themselves up because they're selling paper Bitcoin and they're trying to play these legacy games. How does Bitcoin change that going forward? I mean, at what point maybe does the market start being educated on, hey, I can't keep doing this because I'm going to get blown up at some point? Or is it just kind of like, we're humans, it's inevitable, someone's always going to be playing games with Bitcoin?
This is too big to fail. I mean, that's the sad reality of the banks. That's the sad reality of the system that we live in. The natural forest fires aren't allowed to happen, right? The brush just continues to stay there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's no merit. We'll just develop a new shoe. We know the brush is there, the kindling is there. We'll just develop a new sandal and act like it's not there. Just step on top of it, because ultimately, I think that's where you get the BlackRocks that are too big to fail. This is probably back to my tinfoil hat a little bit on this. When you think about the dollar value of Bitcoin as it relates to the amount of assets that BlackRock has. Mm-hmm. So we're in the hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of the assets that IBIT represents to BlackRock. So the dollar value of Bitcoin, being called away. Well, they have a backstop of a few $100 billion with the United States government, with the Fed, with other people. And so it doesn't really matter to them if it's paper Bitcoin or not, because they know they can represent the dollar liability of their Bitcoin holdings, which, again, Coinbase says that they have. Everyone says that they have. I'm just not sure as to who's selling, because I'm not selling. I know you're not selling. So I'm just looking at how they're gobbling up all this Bitcoin. Who the hell is selling this Bitcoin at these prices? That's what I'm fascinated by. Someone's got to, if you know someone, I would love to get on and talk with someone about this. Look at the analytics to show me at that level and at these volumes and at this run rate moving forward, who's selling all of this Bitcoin.
I couldn't agree more. What's the most interesting? So you did a video the other day about Saylor, the MicroStrategy Bitcoin warning. is now spreading to really the rest of the world. And it's an awesome video. And we'll link to stuff obviously in the show notes so people can check it out. But what's, in saying that, I'd love for you to touch on that. And maybe it is your most interesting story in the world right now. So what is the most interesting thing in Bitcoin or just the world? Because those two worlds are really merging, geopolitics and just legacy finance now converging with Bitcoin. We're at that point in the story. What's the most interesting thing going on right now? And maybe it is the MicroStrategy playbook spreading.
Yeah, Bitcoin is the asset with the most, convexity, with the most, they call this volatility smile. And for companies, I think Fidelity just came out with a report. I think Chris Kuiper, the guy's name at Fidelity, just spoke recently at a conference. But, if you're unable to generate a 65% rate of return at a company, and you're not allocating to Bitcoin, then you have to justify that as the new hurdle rate. And that's spreading quickly. Like I'm seeing all kinds of companies. There was a company, BMGL, that came out today that said they're going to buy $1 billion worth of Bitcoin. I'm like I've never heard of BMGL, right? Thumbs Up Media. The dude came on with a finger thumb the other day. They just went public like 3 weeks ago. They're raising $200 million to buy Bitcoin. And so that is the most interesting thing happening in the world, because if you look at what happened in this last bear market, retail was really the ones that were selling off. These were the people that were just getting into Bitcoin. Maybe they bought it through their broker, through their advisor. Actually, retail has been down since the start of the year in terms of its Bitcoin purchases. But corporates have been the one leading the charge. Like they've picked up where retail left off and some. And so that's going to continue to accelerate, because the biggest arbitrage in finance right now, it's honestly not product innovation. Because when you think about AI and you think about what a company can do with AI, how fast can we create new products? How fast can we go to market with new products? How fast can we make our employees more productive, right? That's kind of leveling the playing field across all of these different companies. The most underutilized asset for a publicly traded company is investor relations. It is the story that you tell around your company. The thing that people are starting to understand about MicroStrategy and even Steak and Shake, right? They're a local Indianapolis company, right? A burger joint. Ain't nobody getting burgers at Steak and Shake. Like I live in Indy and I've been to Steak and Shake like twice, but I'm going to go try, to pay with Lightning.
So true.
I'm going to go hook up my Lightning wallet and see if I can go buy a smash burger with a Bitcoin emblem on there, because they're recognizing that it's not only an avenue for newer customers, it's not only an avenue for a newer market, it's an avenue to increase the multiple and the exit liquidity that you have on the story and the brand of your company. Like that's more important than anything. With Bitcoin, they're tapping into a global brand. They're tapping into a global asset class that, if you have that, access to public markets, I can buy your ticker from anywhere in the world. Yeah. MetaPlanet is the best performing stock in the Japanese market. Alex Lizette, our buddy in France, best performing stock on the French stock market, right? And it's like, this was a company that was literally dead in the water. And all they did was integrated Bitcoin into their investor relations and treasury strategy, and it outperformed every other stock on the index. So that's a huge story, because right now, when you're looking for reasons for a person to invest into your company, okay, we're going to integrate AI into our products. Yeah, so is every plumber in America. Give me something else. And so that's the most interesting story, in my opinion, is...
Hold on 1 second. If you are holding your Bitcoin on an exchange still, or sharing your keys and your KYC information with a third party, everything you're learning about right now is completely moot. This is your wake-up call. You are only self-sovereign if you alone hold the keys to your wealth. Bitcoin is the first and only asset in human history where humans can actually custody entirely their asset. Custody sounds daunting at first, and believe me, it was for me 10 years ago, and I missed a year or two of massive gains, and I don't want that to be you. It's exactly why you need to talk to my friends, Tony Asbach and the Bitcoin Way. His team will train you to do it right the first time. We just interviewed Tony the other day, has 50,000 views, an unbelievable response. People love him and his story and what he has to share in his mission. Head on over to thebitcoinway.com/Brandon to schedule a free 30-minute consultation today. Their 5-star rated service is exactly what you need. So quit sitting on your hands like I did a decade ago and get started today. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/Brandon. Now back to the show.
How do we utilize investor relations? How can we go raise equity and capital? How can we go get insurance companies to buy our bonds and our preferred, convertible notes? Because those are the best performing assets in the in the markets as well, too, right now. So that's probably the biggest story, and that's why it's the biggest story.
Brilliantly said. It feels like Silicon Valley and Wall Street, it's still at this juncture, we're being ignored in essence. I say we, I shouldn't say it like that, but like Bitcoin is being ignored still to a large extent. I did like, at what point did they give in? Like you said, all these companies, best performing company, they're being added to the S&P, they're being added to the new NASDAQ, whatever, all these things. It's like, at what point does someone wake up and be like, you know what? I think we should take this Bitcoin thing seriously. It still feels like we're like, I mean, it's in our face every day because we're in the Bitcoin space. We see it. There's echo chamber things going on. But at the end of the day, like this, every single day, and I think you've mentioned in your videos before, right? Like every single day, there was like 10 things happening that would have been like game-changing, life-changing news that you'd get once a year, 10 years ago in Bitcoin. And now it's just 10 times a day. At what point, it still feels like people are just like lost. And even the people that are supposed to not be lost, Silicon Valley, Wall Street, when does that change? What price does this change?
Yeah, price is the number one recruiter to Bitcoin. That continues either negatively or positively. Like having worked at a company that was an exchange, the death of your marketing dollars or your company or whatever is a flat price. Bitcoin loves when the price crashes because it just gives another reason, another memeable moment for someone to say, look, it crashed again. And for us to just say, yeah, wait 18 months, right? Like that's just like more fuel for the social media fodder. Or it just rips somebody's face off to the upside. And they go, yo, I saw Bitcoin at 125K. Like everyone thinks I'm an idiot when it goes down. And then I text them back like, yeah, look who's the idiot now. Or when it goes up, they all say that I'm a genius. And then all the time in between, they ignore me. And so price is still the number one thing. I think if we do break past all-time highs, you get to the numbers, 125, 150, 180, 200. It's an asset class that you cannot deny at that point. And honestly, that's going to be when the chasm breaks, when, they finally see it on their ticker and they're like, okay, I can't ignore this anymore. These guys probably aren't idiots at this point. But I think the thing that people understand or misrepresent is how fast these changes happen. So there's this famous picture of the Easter parade on Fifth Avenue in New York. In 1900, there's one car and the rest of the street is filled with horse and carriages. And then by 1913, the same picture from the same place looking at the same spot on Fifth Avenue in New York, there's only one horse and carriage and there's all cars. And in 1919, I think that there were like 2,800 something horse and carriage businesses, and the industry in total produced $118 million. That same year, Ford alone sold 900,000 cars and they produced, I think it was like 330 million. So the industry that, it was only going to take, 10% of, it more than doubled it in less than 2 decades in terms of the revenue that one company generated. And when you think about Uber and taxi rides, when you think about Amazon and books, and when you think about these companies, this is the big Jeff Booth thing that everyone misses. You cannot price the new system in the existing system. One, the denominator of the existing system, because we live in a fiat world, will continue to get bigger. We keep using this 900 trillion number. Honestly, in 10 years, 900 trillion is going to be, what is that? What's after a trillion?
Quadrillion.
Quadrillion?
Yep.
Yeah. It's going to be 1.4 quadrillion, right?
Yep.
So one, the denominator is still going to get bigger. But two, of the asset classes that it eats, it's going to be exponentially bigger. So people talk about Bitcoin at $20 trillion, eating gold's market cap, 22 trillion, whatever it is right now. It's going to more than double. It's going to 5x that. When you look at every other digital monopoly and innovation, they've passed their analog version, not just by a little bit, but by a lot of it. And that's what's hard for people to recognize and to fathom. And so when that happens, it'll be too hard to deny. The plumbing's already getting put in place, and we're not even going to know or recognize all of the other beneficiaries of this that come after it. Like the biggest beneficiary of the light bulb was like appliances. Like the light bulb went in and like laid out all this electrical wiring all across the country. And that allowed people to sell dryers and washers and other things into it. Like we can't even fathom all of the other industries that are either going to get wiped out or that are going to get built because Bitcoin is here.
Such an incredible point. It's hard. You can't wrap your mind around it. We just don't know. What's the most interesting aspect of what Michael Saylor is up to, and just the corporate balance sheet, weaponizing the corporate balance sheet, and what all these companies are doing, and the raft of people, as Dr. Jeff just recently said, just the raft of businesses coming to this. What's the most interesting aspect of what Saylor is doing?
I mean, the most interesting aspect of what he's doing is he's creating new like financial products. Like, so the Strike and Strife product that they have, SRTF, SRTK, one, they're really interesting in that they give people a fixed return. They give people, I think it's an 8%, I don't know, it's between 7 and 9%, dividend yield on the low end, but they can also partake in the upward end of Bitcoin. So when you look at what people in retirement actually need, it's to not have those massive drawdowns. Like the first 10 years of your retirement are the most important. Right. It's like that lost generation, they say, that retired in 2000 to like 2008, that pretty much they drew down on their portfolio with no places to get return. And then after that, you're just trying to live off a smaller and smaller base. And so I think that's a really interesting thing, is that people can get a fixed return that outperforms the market, the free market rate of return. And they can also capture the upside of Bitcoin. That's really interesting. I think the next most interesting thing that Michael Saylor is doing is he's helping people to understand that change doesn't happen through facts and figures. It happens through feelings and emotions. And if Michael Saylor has done anything for us in Bitcoin, or for anything for storytellers out there, it's to help people to realize, like, the reason why he's so captivating is because he uses analogies to make his point. He uses stories in order to make his point. And so you're not arguing with him about Bitcoin. You're going to have to argue with him about whether the Louisiana Purchase was a good investment for America. Was Alaska a good investment for? What about California? What do you think about that? And he completely removes the fight from Bitcoin itself, because he's transporting you to somewhere else with a story.
Yes.
And that's what I think people have to learn. Like, this is my biggest beef with like the whole Bitcoin industry and folks, is they're showing people like a price chart, and they're showing people, some data point or something about logic or facts or, the code, and it's just like
21 million. Yeah.
Yeah, 21 million. Yeah. Like, bro, I can't count to 21. Like, and I need a story. Like, I need something to help me get there that's unrelated to Bitcoin that I won't argue with you about. And that's the thing that I think he's trying to like teach people, like, subtly. All these reporters, when someone says something negative about his company, or someone says something negative about Bitcoin, he doesn't even answer the question. Mm-hmm. It's like my favorite thing about like Jesus in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Somebody will try to hit him with a question, and he just goes off on a parable, completely left field of what they were talking about. And that's really how we have to learn how to respond to people about Bitcoin, because it's not about Bitcoin.
Right.
It's not. It's helping them to attach to a story that they're familiar with, that they won't argue with you about. That's what I think Saylor's doing. I think he's giving us a masterclass on how to do that. And I think people are so like fascinated that he's doing it with Bitcoin. But honestly, you can take this playbook to anything when you're trying to think about how do I win friends and influence people.
So well said. And I love that you use, like you said, Jesus, we always use parables, right? I mean, there's always stories and parables, and it was reframing. Because as we know, I mean, I'm not the greatest question asker in the world, but most humans, like, we ask the wrong questions. And my father-in-law is famous for saying that all the time. He's an attorney, and he's like, someone to do something, like, wrong question. Like, that's the wrong question. You asked the wrong question, and it's like, do you want the right response? Because you're not asking the right question. And that's what us Bitcoiners are doing a lot of time, where Saylor's getting this question and he's like, that's not what you mean, or it's not what you're trying to say. So I'm going to go over here with it and reframe it. So I love you said that. I would love for you to get your thoughts on what Jack Mallers is doing now with 21, with Cantor Fitzgerald and Tether and Nakamoto, like all these companies, these new entities now being formed specifically to acquire Bitcoin, develop products and services, etc. I would love you to unpack this a little bit and give your thoughts.
Well, I mean, some might say that he's doing too much, right? A lot of people, when you think about the best investors or the best founders, the best entrepreneurs, the best creators, most of them were like really laser focused on like one thing. And so they see all of these different companies that he has, whether it's, Strike and all of these different products, and or he sees 21 Capital, and they think he's sort of diverted, but he's still really only focusing on one major thing, which is Bitcoin is going to transform capital. It's going to transform payments, which is, I think, really the thing that he got into it for. I think more so than the Treasury Strategy, like $42 billion, we're going to be the MicroStrategy 2.0. I mean, Tether's a money machine. Don't get me wrong. But the idea, when you look at where Strike has been able to try to get into other countries and other places and allow you to, exchange one currency for another just through the Lightning Network, and you don't even need to know how it happened. I mean, the bigger story is that it's going to be embedded into the global financial system. Like Tether plus Strike, or that sort of infrastructure sitting on top, is really going to allow Bitcoin native payments and functionality, and for the dollar to become the global reserve currency in a way that's user friendly, in a way that's on your phone, in a way that's easy for people to interact with. I'm I think ranker of, Bitcoin exchanges. There's a lot of great Bitcoin only companies out there. I think most people would say that Strike is probably the easiest to use in terms of the interface, in terms of how simple it is for people to get onboarded and how successfully they've done that in other countries across the world. That's the bigger story with 21 Capital. It's stable coins. Tether's stable coin is going to be integrated into a Bitcoin native network that will be accessible to people through a simple app and phone everywhere around the world. I think that's more interesting than the 42 billion, Bitcoin Treasury Strategy.
It's fascinating. Transitioning just a little bit, what do you think of the Bitcoin bill, or eventually maybe a Bitcoin bill or whatever? What would you like to see in it? Because we talked earlier about just business adoption. We talked about people utilizing Bitcoin, things of that nature. What would you like to see in a bill? Would it be a de minimis exemption of capital gains? Would it be a full capital gains repeal? Would it be legal tender? Like, what do you see in a Bitcoin? Is it that, a country buying Bitcoin? If it's Dante crafting the bill, what would you be really aiming to put into that?
The number one bill that needs to be passed in terms of Bitcoin and Bitcoin adoption at the state level is Bitcoin being counted as a like-kind asset, like real estate. So anyone who's ever been in real estate, there's this method, I believe it's called the 1031 exchange, right? Where if you sell an asset or a piece of real estate within 180 days, if you transfer that asset into another asset, you don't have to pay any capital gains. And this is what happens in real estate. One, you get 30x leverage, right? You get put to, a few percent down. The bank will give you all of this money out of thin air. And then once you have gotten equity in that property, well, the idea is that you would never sell it, right? That's the famous Warren Buffett strategy. Like, tax is going to kill your compounding more so than the asset itself. And so if Bitcoin were to be treated like that, there's $330 trillion worth of assets that people are trying to get out of right now. I don't know if you drive down your street. Sometimes I just go on Zillow for fun or Redfin and look at how long these houses have been on the market. The days on the market number is creeping up. The housing inventory number is creeping up. The number of permits but non-starts in terms of new builds is creeping up. Mortgage applications are down. This is an asset class that, one, no one can afford, no one can buy, and no one can get rid of. And so one of the most massive flows of capital that would come into Bitcoin would be literally if Bitcoin would be treated as a like-kind asset, either from or into real estate if you sold it. Because if we think of it as property, just digital property, we think of it in the same terms of ways that real estate investors already think of this stuff. I mean, a lot of people get into Bitcoin mining because it makes sense for them in terms of monthly recurring rental income, where I have to think about my vacancy rates and I have a property manager who handles it and takes a percentage. Like, people already think in that mindset. I think that'll be the most massive capital unlock, along with like capital gains tax removals in general. But I think the ability to treat it like a like-kind asset where real estate investments can flow into Bitcoin, and or I can sell Bitcoin and buy physical property back in the real world, is going to be an unlock.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Do you think that's really, like, do you think the capital gains part of that just itself, like, to me, it's something I've thought about a lot over the years of just like, oh, I'd love to use this even more, but it's, there's capital gains and it's just like tracking things, whatever. Do you think just that alone is a huge unlock? Because people, it's always like, well, I'm sure you see it all the time. You're like on YouTube comments or whatever it is. It's like, well, can I buy, something in a grocery store with it? Ha ha ha. And it's like, yeah, of course it's hard right now. It's harder because we have capital gains. What happens when that's unlocked? I mean, is that how you see it?
Yeah. I mean, everyone tries to like poo-poo on Square a lot. Mm-hmm. One, they've had this lightning ability in their back pocket for years. Literally, I think in 3 months, if there was a clear regulation around capital gains taxes, Square would flip on Bitcoin and Lightning payments and all of their point of sale terminals across the globe, like overnight. And the reason why like that comment is super frustrating to me of like, yeah, but you can't pay for coffee with it. One, if you think about it from a coffee shop or the restaurant owner's perspective, like, I had to pay my baristas and my waiters and waitresses today. I paid for the inventory and the goods and materials that you're eating right now 2 weeks ago. And what you're paying me for this thing right now, I'm not going to get in my account for 7 days. Like, that cash conversion cycle is not good for any business. Like, that's why working capital is the number one constraint in most small businesses. It's why most small businesses fail. It's not because, they can't think in their brain that, oh, this sandwich cost me $5 and I need to sell it for $7. Okay. Everybody can do that. What about the duration and time mismatch of when cash hits my account versus the goods and material and people I need to pay in order to generate that product? And so overnight, Bitcoin would allow people to go from this multiple week cash conversion cycle.
If you're liking this interview, but you're just wondering, hey, you know what, Brandon, this is amazing stuff. And I get you have these guests on and they're talking about how orange pilling the world is so great and how Bitcoin is going to take over the world. How in the world do I educate my family and friends? How do I get people to understand what most people just don't care about, quite honestly. Bitcoin trading cards is the way to do that. When you open up these cards, you see the foil cards, you see the chase, you see the glossy cards, young, old, boy, girl, man, woman, it doesn't matter. People love these cards. It's awesome because they're super valuable, by the way. Amazing little side note. However, it Trojan horses them into the most important thing of the day. It's not politics. It's not all the things that we fight about. It's changing the money, fix the world. Bitcoin trading cards is the best way that we have going in order to do that, no matter who you are. You're going to love them. Playable characters 10 for 10% off at checkout. Playable characters 10 off at checkout. btc-tc.com. You're going to absolutely love these things. Now back to the show.
To real-time payments. Like we're shrinking that window from here to here because it's not a capability thing. Like the companies like Lightspark have been adding liquidity and channels and enterprise, lightning capability in the back end for these companies to do this. Like Steak and Shake would love to get paid for that burger and shake that they sold today versus next week.
With no fees.
And not on the weekends. What about the weekends? What about everything else? So that's like the most frustrating thing for me. If that came down, you would see Visa and MasterCard and all of these companies lobby like you've never seen before, because it would effectively kill their business overnight.
Literally. Adapt or die, right? What do you think about circling back to Saylor a little bit here? What are your thoughts with his wide range of possibilities, just price, 3 million to 13 million to 45 million? How do you see this? Let's take it this cycle first. I mean, where do you see things headed over the next 6 to 12 months? I mean, everyone, with bated breath is kind of like, okay, what's going to happen here? Like, what do you see happening this year, this cycle? And then we'll extrapolate it out in a minute.
All right. I'm pulling up my phone here because I want to look at what is the Berkshire stock at.
No.
Not the B shares. Okay. So the A shares, the class A shares of Berkshire Hathaway, right? There's people that were getting into Berkshire Hathaway in the 70s and the 80s and 90s at $100, $200, $300 because they've never split these shares. The price of Berkshire Hathaway class A shares are sitting at $770,660.
Wow.
Right? Like that, and so when you think about the amount of price appreciation, when you think about where the number of Bitcoin could actually be, $13.5 million is just not a crazy number. It sounds crazy from where we are today.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But when you think about the returns and the amount that just regular stocks have gone up, best performing stock of the last 20 years, everyone talks about Apple and Microsoft, and yeah, sure, Nvidia is up there now, but it's been like Monster energy drinks. Like, what utility have they provided other than 13-year-olds staying up all night on LAN parties playing Halo? Like, what value have they brought to the world? And then when you think about this global asset like called Bitcoin, and it being a $13.5 million asset, I think that's like honestly really small. I think people are thinking of what will happen in 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. But Amazon went public in 95, 97, and now it's a $2 trillion company. Like, we're going to see Bitcoin 10x, 20x, 30x, 40x, 100x from here. I don't see that as a crazy thing. His price predictions are spot on because the first wave that he was on was the mobile wave. Then it was the cloud wave. And now he's seeing this Bitcoin wave, which is better than any technological wave, because the thing that he understood is that if you don't have the most resources, if your cost of capital is cheaper than mine, then eventually you will be able to hire more talent. You'll be able to build more product faster. You'll be able to hire more salespeople. You'll be able to build more integrations. Your company is eventually going to get outcompeted by the big 5 tech companies in whatever lane that you're getting into. You want to build a productivity tool? Good luck. There's this thing called Microsoft Word, Microsoft Office, Microsoft Excel. You have no chance. If you want to build business intelligence, good luck. Salesforce gobbled up Tableau like, just some random tuck-in acquisition. You think you're going to outbuild Microsoft BI or Salesforce in the next decade? Probably not. And Google acquired Looker, right? I'm just getting super nerdy here on some of this BI stuff. But like whatever lane or angle that you're in, you don't have a big enough moat. You can't acquire capital cheap enough. And so Saylor realized he spent all of this time building mobile apps and mobile app companies and business intelligence and all of these sorts of things, only to realize there's a short-term window and advantage before the big players get in. So I have to get into an industry or a niche or a place that they're not going to get into, which is Bitcoin. I think he's testing Microsoft. He said another thing about Microsoft the other day, why they should buy Bitcoin. And they're just not going to buy it. He's like, great. More of an angle for me to get in here before you guys get a chance to. And no one's going to catch him. No one's going to catch MicroStrategy. They're the 14th largest company in terms of balance sheet in the world. They're top 90 in terms of market cap. We're going to see them in the top 10. And you know what? It had nothing to do with a technological or product advantage. It had everything to do with seeing what the next wave was and them getting on it. So 13.5 million, he's seen it before. Like if anybody knows what's going on, it's him. People don't give him credit, Brandon. He's, I think, the longest active, now that Warren Buffett is stepping down, I think he's the longest active and most tenured publicly traded officer in the world. I think there's Warren Buffett and then there's him. So who's seen more markets than Michael Saylor out there? Nobody. I trust him. I trust 13.5.
Incredible. What do you think the Bitcoin? I mean, obviously the Coinbase stuff, whatever, paper Bitcoin. It's like all, we went from core wars and op returns like a week ago, and now it's just like, rage about, paper Bitcoin, and it's something new every day. Do you think price? I mean, it's weird saying it above 100,000, like price is suppressed, but do you think there's anything at play there?
100%. Like I'm ready. I'm like super willing to put on my tinfoil hat. I'm 100% willing to play that game. So when you look back at last year, right, you look at the amount of Bitcoin that the ETFs purchased. I think now collectively across the ETFs, it's about 6% of the total Bitcoin supply. And when you think about MicroStrategy, now they own 568,840 Bitcoin, something like that, somewhere in that range. And so they were the most aggressive buyer from August of 2020 until today. And only they've been able to acquire a few percentage points of the network. And so the tinfoil hat theory. If no one in the world was buying more Bitcoin than MicroStrategy, and they only have a few percentage points, and the ETFs were able to acquire 6 to 7% of the total supply, well, that's about 8 to 9% of the total network. When you look at what's happening on chain, of the OGs that have that amount of Bitcoin, the original Bitcoiners, right? The whales, who's selling 9% of the network? I don't see it on chain. Maybe I'm missing it. I subscribe to Checkmatey and the Check on Chain, his on chain analytics. I haven't seen 9% of the supply of Bitcoin move in the last year to year and a half. So if you look out at the run rate of just the ETFs alone, we're not even going to go to other asset classes, corporations, companies, XYZ. If they get to 10% run rate of the Bitcoin network in next year at the same run rate that they're at, let's say there's no acceleration, 15% of the network in 2 to 3 years, that means that of this supply, the OGs and people who've been in Bitcoin a while are willing to sell 10% of the network at $100,000 or less. I call BS on that. So if anybody wants to give me the math and tell me how this actually works, if there isn't some sort of IOU on Bitcoin, it doesn't make sense. Who is selling them this supply? If we're just going let's just extrapolate out a year or 2 years or 3 years, they own 20% of the network. That means that the OG Bitcoiners will have wanted to displace 20% or 30% of their stack at $100,000. Doesn't add up to me. So I don't know, maybe someone's willing to go to war or debate with me on where all this is moving and how it's moving, but I don't think the math works.
What do you think? What do you think the price? And maybe you haven't gone this far down the road, but what do you think it should be? Like, are you a Samson guy or like Samsonite? Are you Samsonite? Where it should be 200,000 right now. Like, where do you think it makes more sense that we should be at right now?
It's hard for me to live in the land of where it should be, because honestly, I mean, I think there's probably other valuations that I would put onto it. Like when you look at the amount of kind of excess capital that's in real estate or other markets, I mean, I think we could easily be at $200,000. But speaking specifically, like what happens in financial markets, what you saw the other day, we had this run back above $100,000, and then we dipped back to like 99, and then we jumped right back to 103,000. And there's these massive candles that happen, ironically, when the market crashed and then when it rebounded. I think it's just leverage. I think it's derivatives. I think this is the game that happens when you get into TradFi, where there's money that can move behind closed doors. There's paper derivatives. There's leverage products that can suppress a price above or below a certain level. And it's hard for me to know or to understand really why the price isn't a little bit higher than it is. I mean, one of the things I do subscribe to the checkmatey approach, in that we skipped that bubble from 70 to like 85. We literally went from like 70K like up to 90 in like a blink of an eye. And so there's a large amount of people that came in between $90,000 and $100,000 who were out of the money for the past several months. And so a lot of the sell action and why we dipped back below to that like 80K level was a lot of these people who just aren't into Bitcoin, who don't understand Bitcoin, that were selling kind of paper hands. And so that's kind of why we refilled there. But as far as the upside from 95 to 109, I feel like we could or should be higher, but I don't know.
What do you think? So, I mean, extrapolate that out, because I think some people might say, well, yeah, I mean, if it goes up to, diminishing returns, they feel like, well, yeah, if it goes up to 500, we might have a crazy drawdown back to 100 or, whatever. If we're refilling and having people having this drawdown from 105 to back down to like 80, and people are that papered handed where they can't even stomach, a 10,000, 20,000 drop. What's it going to be like when it's going from 500 to a 200 or a million down to 300? Like, what does that look like to you?
Man, I think we're seeing decreasing volatility in Bitcoin. I think the upside volatility, who knows? Like, I think it's still a bit muted, but certainly I think that the downside volatility is going to continue to shrink over time. So when you think about a lot of the individual buyers that are able to make the moves in Bitcoin, let's say mid-quarter, midday, mid-afternoon, right? Bitcoin's pumping, Bitcoin's crashing. I'm able to go into my River app or my Swan app or Strike and hit the sell button, right? But when you're dealing with institutions that have quarterly filings, when you're dealing with publicly traded companies that have disclosures and have to move a large amount of capital, the money doesn't move that fast. And so the other thing that you get is the more that we are relying on Bitcoin as the store of value, the less that governments, institutions, and regular players will allow it to go down. That's why the S&P 500 will never crash. You know why? Because every financial advisor out there is reliant on the S&P 500 staying above 4,700, right? Every retiree is relying upon the S&P 500 to live out their retirement and be able to draw down on their savings in their retirement vehicles. Every single person in America, every fund manager, every index is relying upon the S&P 500 continuing to go up. So in the event that it does crash 20 to 30%, the breakers go on. We can't have it go down 50% because it is the store of value. It has a network effect of that. I need it to stay here as much as my neighbor needs it to stay here, as much as my guy on the soccer team needs it to stay here, as much as the guy down the street needs it to stay here. And that's sort of the social effect that the S&P 500 has had. And so once we get a little bit further out into Bitcoin, once we go into a $10 trillion asset class, a $20 trillion asset class, we're not going from 1 million to 200,000, because there's going to be too many people relying on it as a store of value.
That's fascinating. A quick thought on unit count bias. So we talked about Berkshire Hathaway and just the magnitude that those A shares have got to. And again, people have been buying those. They've held it, and people have bought those over time. And as well as I do in the content world, and people coming to consume content, we have to tell stories, and the content you stay for the content, the good content. But you need hooks. You need good things. So here's a hook for you, Dante. Will 0.1 Bitcoin, will that retire someone in 10 years from now, 20 years from now? If you're the average person comes and looks at us and says, well, you know what? It's just too much, man. I'm Dave Portnoy and I got to go get Ripple. I got to go to XRP because it's 10 cents, 20, whatever the hell it is. It's 10 cents and I need this instead of this, buddy. So sorry, I'm going to go this route. I know your thing you got going over there looks great and it makes sense, but this. So I'd love your thoughts on this. Unpack this for me.
0.1 Bitcoin will get you to retirement. Here's the caveat. At what price are you buying 0.1 Bitcoin? at what price do you have 0.1? Because I can tell you 10 years from now, 0.1 will not retire you. If you begin to be aggressive today, spending less than you earn, being conservative, thinking about how can I unlock liquidity in other assets and classes that I don't need in order to get into this asset that is Bitcoin, I do believe that 0.1 will allow you to retire. And what do I mean by retire? Because it's not going to be the only asset that people have within their portfolio. They're going to have bonds, they're going to have stocks, they're going to have real estate, they're going to have other assets that they're able to draw upon. But those things are going to become worth less and less over time. We all know it. So the life that you think you want, you're not going to be able to have with just those assets alone. You're going to need another asset growing 20, 30, 40% a year to offset the loss in value that these other things are having at 10, 20, 30, 40% a year. I don't know what's going on out there if you heard this screaming, but that's just my house and where. So, I think it will retire you, but just win. If you get in 5 years, too late.
Yeah,
I honestly believe that because the price at which you'll be buying 0.1 Bitcoin, we're going to be at escape velocity. And no matter how much money you make, if you are outside of if you are squarely within the middle class or even the upper middle class, the ability to have or acquire an additional $250,000 outside of your normal job, your normal discretionary income is going to be too much for people to overcome. But 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 today, that's doable. Buckle down, spend less than you earn, save like a madman, get an extra hustle, get another job, find another way to earn that income and get that Bitcoin because your other portfolio assets have nowhere else to go.
Circling back to the very beginning, how many hours do you think you put into study? Because this is like this, it gets confusing at times because people understanding Bitcoin is counterintuitive until you see it. Then it becomes very intuitive. And it's this deflation and inflation thing. And people hear like, oh, I've got to study for 100 hours or 1,000 hours. Like it scares a lot of people, right? So what do you say when people are, hey, you got to study a certain amount of hours, you just haven't studied it enough yet? How do you kind of talk about that, combat that, but also literally how many hours have you put into studying this where you can talk at this level about Bitcoin and money?
Well, I think in terms of like YouTube videos and those things now, I mean, I've probably done 400 or 500, somewhere in that level of videos where every day I'm looking at stories. So, I'm always collecting so I can always be connecting. And so I'm always collecting stories. I'm always collecting an angle and I'm looking at the world and, well, what happens if Bitcoin infiltrates this, or how would this be different if? And so I don't know. I would say, collectively, like I put, I think much more than 10,000 hours in. but there's always something new. There's always something to be understood. There's always something to do. Because, for me, once you get to a certain level in your Bitcoin stack, your Bitcoin journey, there's always a place where you can level up. When you're thinking about new devices, when you're thinking about new ways that you can get into Bitcoin, KYC, free Bitcoin mining, thinking about, how Bitcoin is going to revolutionize the grid. When you think about how Bitcoin is revolutionizing states and municipal bonds and real estate and mortgages and home equity lines of credit, it's sort of just taking over every little thing. And so when you get there, when you start, you don't have to start there. I would say start with the basics. I would say start with a few books, start with a few podcasts, start with, just having a dollar cost average on for a year that you just leave it on and you don't touch it, you don't change it, you don't do anything different to it. But then when you look even through drawdowns in times of volatility, you'll be like, oh, this thing is like still up 5% or 7%. How is that possible? When I started buying, the price was at 90,000, but it's at 78. How is it that I'm literally up on my purchases? People, it's a mind-blowing thing for people once you actually start to get it. And then it starts to permeate through all that you do. There's so many great people out there. There's so much great content out there. Like Playable Characters is one of the favorites. You've gotten a lot of great people on there. My kids, now they're getting to the age where cards are kind of coming back. So the Bitcoin trading cards are a thing. They don't take them to school yet.
Too valuable for that.
But they have them. Yeah, too valuable for that. But it's going to be interesting to see how they navigate Bitcoin and what they do with it. But come at it like a child. Come at it, just ask very simple questions. Get it around you. Your level of conviction rises with the level of your education. So dive in.
Amazing. Beautifully said. Any last words of wisdom? Touch on what you're working on right now. Obviously, all the content you're doing, the different initiatives in business endeavors, and where can people find you as well?
You can just, I'm doing my show is Bitcoin Simply on the Simply Bitcoin channel. I like to break it down super simple and ways for normal people to kind of consume it and understand it in a way that's probably fun or engaging or entertaining or doesn't take up your whole day or afternoon. I am on Twitter at Dante_Cook1. One thing that I'm working on in terms of Bitcoin in my Bitcoin journey specifically is I'm getting into the whole solo mining thing and thinking about all the ways that I can get some wild sats and try to figure out, what does Bitcoin look like off the reserve or off the grid. So that's kind of a fun thing that I'm looking to learn, looking to get into and try to really understand more and more. So I'm, reaching out to some guys that are kind of in the mining industry and getting into that a little bit more. That's more out there for me. But it's one way that I can continue to push myself because the content and the information and what is Bitcoin and I do that all the time. I do that multiple times a week. So I got to really get off grid to continue to push myself.
Mr. Dante Cook, thank you for being a playable character, coming back on the show, but being a playable character in a sea of non-playable characters. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, man.
If you can't get enough of these interviews and you want to deepen your education on sound money, wealth building, and freedom, you're not going to want to miss this playlist here. Happy binging. Check it out now. We'll see you inside.